treat epilepsy, but it's really kind of come back into the spotlight in recent decades.
And it's mostly used for children, right?
It is. It's primarily used for children with epilepsy, especially those who haven't responded well to medication.
And how does it work? Like, what's the mechanism there?
So the exact mechanism is still not fully understood, but we know that it changes the way the body uses energy. Instead of using glucose from carbohydrates, the body starts using ketones, which are produced from fat. And this shift in energy metabolism seems to have an anti-seizure effect.
Okay, so it's basically like tricking the brain into using a different fuel source.
Exactly. And for some children, it can be really, really effective.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine it's probably pretty hard to stick to a diet like that.
It can be. It can be very restrictive. And it requires a lot of planning and monitoring, especially for kids, you know?
Yeah.
They're still growing. They need a lot of nutrients. So it's definitely not something to undertake lightly.
Right. You definitely want to work closely with a rigorous dietitian or a nutritionist who has experience with the ketogenic diet.
Absolutely. They can help you make sure that your child is getting all of the nutrients that they need and that the diet is being implemented safely and effectively.
Okay, so that's the ketogenic diet. What other alternative treatments are out there?
So another option is vagus nerve stimulation, or VNS.
Okay, I think I've heard of that one too.
Right.
What is that exactly?
So the vagus nerve is a long nerve that runs from the brain all the way down to the abdomen. And it plays a role in a lot of different bodily functions, including heart rate, digestion, and breathing.
Okay.
And VNS therapy involves implanting a small device under the skin in the chest area. And this device sends regular electrical impulses to the vagus nerve.
And that's supposed to help with seizures.
Right, so it's not entirely clear how it works, but it seems to modulate brain activity and reduce the frequency and severity of seizures.
Interesting. So it's kind of like a pacemaker for the brain.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
It's sending those regular signals to kind of keep things in check.
And is this something that's used for children as well?
It is. It's approved for use in children over the age of 4 who have epilepsy that hasn't responded well to medication.
Okay, so it's another option for those kids who are kind of struggling with those drug-resistant seizures.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the ketogenic diet, we've got vagus nerve stimulation. What else?
So another area that's showing a lot of promise is neurostimulation. And there are a couple of different types of neurostimulation that are being used for epilepsy.
Okay, like what?
So one is called responsive neurostimulation, or RNS.
Okay.
And this involves implanting a device in the brain that can detect abnormal electrical activity. And when it detects that activity, it sends out a small electrical pulse to try to stop the seizure before it starts.
Whoa, so it's like intercepting the seizure before it even happens.
Exactly. And it's very targeted, so it's only stimulating the specific area of the brain where the seizure is originating.
Wow, that's incredible. And this is actually being used in people.
It is. It's been approved for use in adults with focal epilepsy. And it's showing a lot of promise in terms of reducing seizure frequency.
Wow, that's really cool.
Okay.
So that's RNS. What other types of neurostimulation are there?
So another one is deep brain stimulation, or DBS.
Okay.
And this is similar to RNS in that it involves implanting electrodes in the brain. But with DBS, the electrodes are implanted in a deeper part of the brain, and they deliver continuous electrical stimulation.
So it's not just responding to seizures, it's constantly stimulating the brain.
Right, and it's thought to work by kind of normalizing brain activity and reducing the overall excitability of the brain.
Okay. And this is also being used for epilepsy.
It is. It's been used for other neurological conditions like Parkinson's disease for a longer time, but it's now being studied as a treatment for epilepsy as well.
Okay. So it's exciting to see that there are all these new technologies and new treatments that are being developed for epilepsy.
Absolutely. And I think it really gives hope to people who are living with epilepsy that there are more and more options becoming available all the time.
Yeah, definitely. So, we've talked about some of the more high-tech treatments, but are there any, simpler things that people can do at home to help manage their epilepsy?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to remember that lifestyle factors can play a big role in epilepsy management.
Okay. Like what kind of things?
So one of the most important things is getting enough sleep.
Makes sense. Sleep is important for everything.
It is. But for people with epilepsy, it's especially important because sleep deprivation can be a major seizure trigger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So making sure Sophia gets a good night's sleep is really crucial.
Absolutely. And then stress management is another big one.
Oh, yeah. Stress can definitely trigger seizures.
It can. And unfortunately, living with epilepsy can be stressful in itself.
Right. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
It can be. So finding healthy ways to manage stress is really important.
Okay. So, what What kind of things can people do to manage their stress?
Well, there are a lot of different techniques that people find helpful. Some people find that exercise is really helpful.
Oh, yeah, exercise is good for everything.
It is, and it can be a great way to relieve stress. Others find that things like yoga or meditation are helpful.
Okay. So it's about finding what works for you.
Exactly. And then there are also things like aromatherapy or massage therapy that some people find relaxing.
So it's about creating a calming environment for yourself.
Absolutely. And then another thing that people sometimes overlook is avoiding their triggers.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you know what triggers your seizures, you can try to avoid those things.
Exactly. And for some people, the triggers are pretty obvious, like flashing lights or certain sounds.
Right.
But for others, it might be more subtle things, like certain foods or even certain smells.
So it's about paying attention to your body and noticing what seems to bring on your seizures.
Exactly. And keeping a seizure diary can be really helpful for that.
Okay. So you're tracking when you had a seizure, what you were doing beforehand, what you ate, what you were feeling, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And that can help you start to identify patterns and figure out what your triggers might be.
Okay. So that's really helpful advice. I think a lot of people don't realize how much they can do on their own
Yeah.
to help manage their epilepsy.
Right. And it's not about replacing medical treatment. It's about working in conjunction with your doctor to create a comprehensive management plan.
Right. It's about taking control of your health.
Absolutely. And I think that's empowering for a lot of people.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about traditional medications like levetiracetam and phenobarbital. We've talked about the ketogenic diet, vagus nerve stimulation, neurostimulation, all these different options. But before we wrap up, I just want to reiterate something that you said earlier about the importance of working closely with your child's doctor.
Absolutely. That's probably the most important takeaway from all this.
Right, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to help you navigate all of these options and figure out what's going to be the best treatment plan for Sophia.
Exactly. And they can also monitor her progress and make adjustments as needed.
Right, so don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to advocate for your child.
Absolutely. You're your child's best advocate.
Okay. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this part of the deep dive, but we're going to be back in the next part to talk more about some of the other exciting developments in epilepsy treatment. And we're going to be digging into some even more cutting-edge research. So stay tuned.
And I think that's really what it comes down to, right? Like there's no one-size-fits-all approach to epilepsy treatment.
Yeah, definitely. Every child's different. Every case is different.
Absolutely. So what works for one child might not work for another. And even for the same child, what works at one point in time might not work later on, as their epilepsy evolves, as they grow and develop.
Right. So it's really about finding what works best for Sophia at this particular moment in time.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have that open communication with your doctor and to really be involved in the decision-making process.
Yeah. And I think that can feel empowering for parents too, right? Like you're not just passively accepting whatever the doctor says, you're actively participating in Sophia's care.
Absolutely. And, you're the expert on your child. You know her better than anyone else. So you bring really valuable insights to the table.
Yeah. And I think sometimes parents can feel intimidated by doctors. They feel like they don't have the medical knowledge to really question things or to make suggestions. But I think it's so important for parents to remember that they are an equal partner in their child's care.
Absolutely. And, doctors appreciate that too. They want to hear your concerns. They want to know what's working, what's not working. They want to work together with you to find the best possible solution for your child.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, if there's one piece of advice that we could give to our listeners today, it would be that, right? Like be an active participant in your child's care.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. And the more information you have, the better equipped you'll be to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that you're not alone in this. There are so many other families out there who are going through the same thing.
Absolutely. There's a whole community of support out there, so reach out, connect with other families, share your experiences, and learn from each other.
Yeah, and I think that can be really helpful, just knowing that you're not alone in this journey.
Absolutely. And, sometimes just talking to someone who understands what you're going through can make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive. But we want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope that this has been helpful for you.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And remember, we're going to be back with more deep dives in the future, so stay tuned.